All right, let's talk about how you plan for your application to get huge. And I don't just mean from a technical point of view, but as a core part of your business strategy. The goal is to make sure that when you find massive success, it's actually a celebration, not a full-blown crisis.
So let me start with a story you hear all the time in the tech world. A company, they hit it big. I mean, user growth just goes through the roof. And right at that moment, when the champagne should be flowing, the whole application just starts to buckle and crumble under the pressure. You know, your first instinct is to think, oh, it's a tech problem. The servers are overloaded, the database can't keep up, that kind of thing. But the real failure here, it isn't just about code or hardware. It's a failure of strategy, of planning, and that puts the entire business and all its future revenue at serious risk.
Okay, so first things first. Let's really nail down what we mean when we say scalability, but let's look at it from a business leader's perspective.
We have to stop thinking about scalability as some engineering problem you can just kick down the road. It's not. It's a fundamental business strategy. It's about protecting the money you're trying to make, keeping the customers you've worked so hard to get, and making sure you stay ahead of the game. An unscalable system is a direct threat to your bottom line, period.
So this puts leaders in a really tough spot, right? Do you try to build for 1 million users from day one, or do you just focus on getting your product out the door as fast as you can? And that decision leads to 2 very common and very dangerous traps.
And this, right here, this is the tightrope executives have to walk. On one side, you've got premature optimization. That's where you burn through your cash and your time building this massive fortress for an army of users that might not even show up. But on the other side, you risk creating an architectural dead end. That's where your own success paints you into a corner and you're stuck with this huge, expensive, and super risky overhaul right when your business can least afford the distraction.
So, how do you find the path forward? Well, the solution isn't about building for 1 million users on day one. It's about building what's called a scalable foundation.
The goal here is evolution, not revolution. From the very beginning, you embed 3 core principles. Modularity, which means building in distinct logical chunks. Loose coupling, so those chunks talk to each other in a clean, predictable way. And a stateless design, so the app doesn't have to remember every little thing about every user session. If you do this, you're not building the final mansion on day one. You're building a house with fantastic bones, one that you can easily expand later without having to tear the whole thing down.
Okay, let's talk about maybe the biggest architectural choice you'll make. Starting with the classic approach, the monolith. Just think of it like a giant old-school department store. Everything. The clothing department, the electronics, the checkout, it's all part of one big interconnected building. It's simple to build, simple to manage, at first.
Now, the modern alternative is a microservices architecture. And this is much more like a shopping mall. You've got a bunch of independent, specialized boutique stores. Each one does one thing really well, and they're all connected by the mall's walkways, but they operate on their own. And if the shoe store gets a massive rush of customers, it doesn't shut down the food court.
And what I love about this is how it frames the choice. See, this isn't just a technical argument for engineers, it's a real business trade-off. The monolith gets you to market faster and cheaper in the beginning. Microservices, on the other hand, give you way better scalability and reliability later on, but they cost more and are more complex to set up. It even changes how you structure your teams.
So what's the pragmatic path? The expert advice is to avoid diving headfirst into the complexity of microservices. Instead, you start with something called a modular monolith. You get the speed of building a single app, but you're really disciplined about creating strict, clean, internal boundaries. This makes it so much easier to pop those modules out into their own separate services later on when the time is right. It's really the best of both worlds.
All right, so we've got our foundation poured. Now let's get into the actual toolkit. Let's look at the specific technologies and strategies you use to build on that foundation and enable all that growth.
So fundamentally, there are 2 ways to handle more traffic. You can scale up, which is vertical scaling. That's like trading in your delivery van for a single massive semi-truck. It's simple, but eventually you just can't buy a bigger truck. The real secret to massive, almost infinite scale is scaling out, or horizontal scaling. Instead of one big truck, you build a whole fleet of vans. 1 becomes 10, 10 becomes 100. Now, your database is almost always going to be the first thing that cries for help, and you have to be smart about how you fix it. You follow a phased approach. First, the cheapest, easiest fix, optimize your code. Next, you add caching to serve common requests from super fast memory. After that, you can use what are called read replicas, basically copies of your database, to handle all the browsing traffic.
And only as a last resort, when you've exhausted everything else, do you look at sharding, which is physically splitting your database into smaller chunks. It's powerful, but it's complex.
And this, right here, is where modern cloud platforms become your absolute superpower. They give you the tools to make this all happen almost automatically. You get load balancers that act like traffic cops directing requests. You get auto-scaling, which is like an elastic engine that adds and removes servers for you. You get containers for consistency, and you even get serverless, which lets you forget about servers altogether.
Of course, all this amazing power brings up a pretty terrifying question, especially if you're an executive or a CFO. What on earth is all of this going to cost?
Yeah, it's really easy to just look at that monthly bill from your cloud provider, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. The total cost of ownership also includes the salaries for the highly skilled DevOps team you need to manage all this complexity, plus all the software and tools they need to do their job. Your real cost is all of these things combined.
A huge part of controlling that cost is being smart about which pricing model you use for which job. You've got options. Pay-as-you-go is super flexible, but it's also the most expensive per hour. If you have a stable, predictable workload, you can get massive discounts. I mean, huge with reserved instances. And for jobs that can be interrupted, spot instances give you the absolute deepest savings. The key to financial control is strategically mixing and matching these.
Okay, last but not least, and this is a big one, because all this planning, all this architecture, all this financial modeling, it's all just a theory. It means nothing until you put it under real-world pressure. You can't just cross your fingers and hope it works. You have to test rigorously and constantly. Load testing answers the question, can we handle a normal busy Tuesday? Stress testing answers, what happens on Black Friday? Does the system bend gracefully or does it completely shatter? And scalability testing is what proves that your auto-scaling strategy, that whole fleet of vans we talked about, actually works the way you designed it to.
And at the end of the day, you have to measure all this technical stuff in a way that actually matters to the business, which is user satisfaction. A great way to do that is with an AppDex score. It's a standard metric that boils down all the complicated data into a single number from 0 to 1. A score of 1 is perfect, a score of 0 is a total failure. The 0.7 you see here would be considered pretty poor. It's a simple, high-level number that tells everyone in the company, at a glance, how happy your users are.
And that brings us right to our final thought. Waiting for a crisis to force you to think about this stuff is a strategy for failure. True, lasting success comes from planning for growth from the very beginning. So the question isn't really if you'll need to scale, it's will you be ready when you do.